Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in strong opposition to this resolution. Basically, if this CRA goes into effect and the rule is dropped, our government's working definition of habitat would revert back to a misguided, harmful, and highly limited definition originally put in place in 2020 by the previous administration. This definition excludes possible habitat that, if restored, could ensure the survival of our most vulnerable species. And so, in effect, what it does is to freeze our remedies into the status quo of habitat that is available to save a species, and discards and disallows the consideration of habitat that is not appropriate for species restoration, but could well be with some minimal level of effort. That status quo is not going to be sufficient for many of our species out there. And so if this is approved, it'll limit the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA's ability to establish critical habitat for listed species based on the best available science. It would limit what counts as habitat specifically by excluding areas that may require some restoration or modifications to allow critically endangered species to recover. As the agency stated in that rulemaking, the definition and statement made in the December 2020 Trump rule are, quote, in tension with the conservation purposes of the Act because they could inappropriately constrain the service's ability to designate areas that meet the definition of critical habitat under the ESA. It's also clear that the original rule invites clear legal challenges, with lawsuits now pending in 20 states on hold while the Biden administration finishes its rulemaking. Reverting back to the Trump-era definition at this point will especially undercut species conservation in the face of climate change and would have direct impact on those areas of our country with particularly high levels of endangered and iconic species, of which Hawaii is primary. As inhabitants of an island state, Hawaii species are especially vulnerable to our changing climate. In 2021 alone, the Fish and Wildlife Service declared 9 new extinctions in my state, and without providing flexibility to resource managers, none more will be on the way. Critical habitat designations can protect areas that are not currently suited for supporting imperiled species, but will be essential for survival and recovery under different conditions in the future. For example, Hawaiian monk seals and sea turtles have become increasingly reliant on beaches in the main Hawaiian Islands for pupping and nesting at sea level as sea level rise inundates their traditional beaches in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. By designating critical habitat in our main islands, NOAA and Fish and Wildlife have made huge inroads in recovering our monk seals, which just recently surpassed a population of over 1,500 for the first time in over 20 years. And so let's just take a concrete example. Let's say that we have a wetland, side-by-side wetland. One part of that wetland, for whatever reason, is in relatively pristine condition. The other side of that wetland has been contaminated by some source, perhaps an oil leak that has rendered that wetland not suitable for habitat. You have an endangered habitat that relies on the wetland on the clean side, but that's not critical mass for that species to survive. Clearly, you would want to use that wetland on the other side with a minimal set of remedies that could be achieved through oil spill remediation and cleanup, and could save that species. However, this rule would disallow the consideration of the currently contaminated wetland for that species remediation. And you can probably think of many other examples that have occurred in the real world. And so the science is clear, and you really need to look no further than real world applications, including Hawaii, for proof that our wildlife management agencies do in fact need the flexibility to broadly classify habitat and to include habitat that, while not currently suited, could well be suited to save these species. And so for these reasons, I urge my colleagues to give these species a chance with this broader definition that we have already adopted using best available science, and vote no on this measure, and I yield back.